Good afternoon, everybody, or almost evening. Good late afternoon to everybody. Glad you could join us this afternoon. I think before we get underway, my colleague Susan Bucky was going to say a few remarks, if you are prepared to do that.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Wendy. Good evening, afternoon, whatever it is, whatever time it is. We're really glad you're here to join us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you very much to Wendy Gelberg for offering this workshop. My name is Susan Bucky. I'm the Director of Employer Engagement at JBS and MassHire downtown Boston. And tonight we're delighted to offer this workshop to the community as part of a series of events. This is the second workshop. We had resume writing last week at this time, and we highly encourage that all of you join us for 2 more events in the month of May. Next week, we will be hosting a resource fair, a community resource fair with a number of amazing training and educational opportunities, some awesome opportunities to reskill yourselves for some new careers, as well as some other resources that can assist you with your job search, your interview attire, a whole bunch of different things. So I'm going to put some information in the chat as soon as I finish speaking, so that you can find this information. It's going to be a webinar just like this one, and you're all welcome to come. The last event of the month of May for this partnership includes a job fair. It's called a community job fair. And again, we have a number of great employers that will be joining us, talking about the positions that they're hiring for and all of the steps to joining their team, as well as their benefits. And you'll be able to ask questions. It'll be a great opportunity. All of these events are being made possible through a partnership with the City of Boston's Project Opportunity team. And I just want to make a special note to thank them for all of their support. And there's a number of other partners, and I don't have their names at the moment, but I want to thank them as well. So I'm going to step away and give the podium to Wendy so she can tell you all you need to know about prepping for an interview. And I hope to see you at the 2 events on next week for the community resource fair and the community job fair. Thanks, Wendy. Have a good night, everyone.
I never muted myself. I was looking to unmute. Thank you, Susan. And again, welcome everybody. Oh, my video is off, or it appears to be. Hang on one second. Sorry about that.
I can see you.
You can see me. That's so strange.
Yep.
I cannot. Okay. Anyway, welcome to everybody. My name is Wendy Gelberg. I'm lead career navigator here at MassHire downtown Boston, and I'm delighted to be able to share with you some of the latest and greatest strategies for succeeding in the interview. So these will be tips and techniques for the entire process, a lot of time in the preparation stage, as well as what to do during the interview itself, and some follow-up activities also. We are recording the session tonight, so we don't typically record most of our sessions, but because this is part of the partnership that Susan was talking about, we are recording. So I want everybody to be aware of that. And I've also activated the option for you to turn on closed captioning if you like to have that feature enabled. If you do wish to do that, if you look on the control panel on your screen, you'll see the phrase, what does it say? Something live transcript. I'm suddenly forgetting the word, but basically you get to activate it, you get to turn it on, and then you'll have it, but it's not there for everybody unless you activate it. All right. There are sort of 3 logical components of a webinar on interviewing: before, during, and after. So that is, in fact, how we are going to organize this. Things to know about beforehand, and do beforehand, things to know about and do during, and things to know and follow up on afterwards. So specific things that you'll know when we're done will include what you see on the screen. Researching, lots and lots of research is part of the preparation stage, knowing about the employer, knowing about the job itself that you've applied for and are interviewing for, and of course, knowing yourself, your own background, your skills, what you bring to the table that might be of particular interest to the employer. You'll know about questions that you'll want to ask during the interview, as well as questions to prepare to answer in the interview. And that will include knowing more about a concept that's referred to as the elevator pitch. That's basically the label for the answer to the "tell me about yourself" question. And most of you, if you've been on interviews, have probably been asked that question. I find when I talk with people, most people really don't like that question. It's actually one of my favorites. So we'll talk a little bit about what to do when you're asked that sort of open-ended question. And then a particular framework that we share with you to help you structure your questions, or your answers rather, to their questions, because some of us by nature are very talkative and say too much and go on a little bit too long. Some of us by nature are a little bit on the brief side. We say as little as we think we can get away with, and maybe we don't quite say enough. And this STAR technique kind of gives us a beginning, middle, and end to organize answers and make them an appropriate length with just enough detail so the employer really can picture you doing the job. And then how to just reduce your anxiety, how to settle yourself, because for most people, interviews are kind of nerve-wracking. And I think even experienced interviewers, even people who enjoy talking, even people who teach other people how to interview, get nervous when we interview ourselves. So that's a common experience, how to kind of rein in the nerves and handle the situation as professionally as possible. I do hope if you have questions along the way, you will post them in the chat. I do have you all on mute, so I'm not able to take spoken questions, but I'm happy to take them in the chat. If anything that you need me to clarify or something I haven't covered that you wondered about, feel free to ask the question in the chat. So what is this thing we call a job interview? It's basically a conversation. It's a business meeting, but it really is just a conversation between possibly just two people, or it might be you and several people. Only there's a purpose for the conversation, and the purpose is the last two bullets that you see on the slide. The purpose is twofold. It's to help the employer understand whether or not you're a good fit for the position, and it also helps you understand whether or not this position is a good fit for you. We sometimes go into interviews desperately wanting the job. I really hope I get this job. And that's part of where we get some of the nervousness from. So I would encourage you to sort of reframe the process when you do get an invitation for an interview. Don't think of it as, I really want this job. You're really excited you have the opportunity to find out more about the job. It's entirely possible that you'll go and you'll be a little disappointed. It's not what you hoped it was. I hope that's not the case, but that's part of this purpose. You need to find out, does this job have what you're looking for? If so, wonderful. Hopefully the process will continue. But if not, you get to walk away. So all of the decision-making power is not only in the hands of the employer. You have some control. I mean, they get to make their decision first, because you might really want the job and not have it offered, but they might offer the job. You don't have to take it. And it's important to remember that. A little bit empowering, I think, to remember that. So interviews come in many different varieties, and we'll identify a few of them and talk about how to prepare for them and manage them, chances are you will get a phone interview before you get any other kind of interview. Doesn't happen 100% of the time, but a lot of the time it does. And the phone interview is really a screening. Very often the people who are representing the company, they're usually recruiters, are calling to see if you have sort of the bare minimum qualifications that they're looking for. That might be an education level, it might be years of experience, it might be experience in a particular industry. It could be salary. They know they're only prepared to pay, fill in an amount, and they know that if you're looking for more than that, this could be a deal breaker. So they want you to know right away. Or sometimes they do it the other way around. Sometimes they'll tell you up front and say, is that okay? And if it's not, that's the end of the process. And sometimes they don't tell you, but they ask you, what are your salary expectations? And you have to put your cards on the table first. Always uncomfortable, because again, you don't want to eliminate yourself from consideration if possible, but they may ask you and you have to be prepared for that question. If you do get an in-person phone interview, the hope is that the follow-up will either be an in-person interview or some kind of remote interview. The in-person interview, pretty much everybody's familiar with. We've all had them. If we've ever held a job before, you probably had a conversation with somebody about the job itself and your qualifications for it. As I said, it can happen in person, face-to-face, the same room, or it can happen remotely. We're using Zoom as a webinar tool right now, but Zoom also has a meeting option where your cameras could be turned on and we could actually be looking at each other face-to-face and having a conversation. The only difference being we're not physically in the same space, but we can actually interact in real time as if we were in the same room. And that video interview, the person-to-person interview, can be one-on-one, or it can be several people interviewing you at the same time, the same way that can happen in person. Some of you, I'm sure, have interviewed with several people at the same time. You might also have interviewed with several people back-to-back. That can happen remotely as well. There are a couple of other remote options that might be new to some of you, should be aware of and be prepared for. There's another kind of video interview that's a remote interview, as all video interviews are, but it's recorded. So rather than talking to a person in real time, as Susan and I were just talking to each other, instead, there are questions on the screen, you answer them, and your answer is recorded and viewed later on by one or more human beings. The advantage of that is, on the employer side, it's an advantage for them, really. They don't have to get all members of their team in the same place at the same time to conduct the interview. That's one of several advantages. So many companies are turning to that version of video interviews. And some of you might encounter a chatbot kind of an interview, either on your phone or on a computer, where as soon as you tune in or log on to a site, a little chatbot box pops up and a typewritten message appears on the screen. Hi, I'm Joe. Or, do you have any questions for us today? I've seen that on websites. If I'm doing product research to buy something I'm interested in, how can we help you today? Well, instead of how can we help you, it might be interview questions that you're expected to type your answers to in the chat box. Weird, but that's the world we're in now. You might be interviewed by more than one person at the same time, as I mentioned before, sort of a panel of people all at the same time. And there even are situations where you might be asked to demonstrate some skills, possibly through a presentation, possibly through performing a task. Sometimes people in the tech field are asked to do some basic programming of some code or solving in a different occupation, maybe solving a mathematical problem to demonstrate that you know how to do certain things, or a typing test for an admin job to make sure that your skills are at the level they want them to be. So there are so many varieties. There's really no limit to what an employer could ask. Well, maybe there are some limits, but there's certainly a wide assortment of possibilities and more. So what do you do to prepare for these many varieties? First of all, hopefully when you're invited for an interview, you'll find out what's the format of the interview, and it's perfectly okay to ask if they don't think to tell you. They might say it's going to be a remote interview and forget to tell you, by the way, there are going to be 5 people interviewing you. Oh, okay, that's a very different feeling when you're on the other side of the screen than when you're just talking to one person at a time. It's nice to know that ahead of time. So that's something to anticipate. Learn what you can ahead of time. So some of the things you're going to want to do ahead of time will be doing as much research as you can about the employer and about the position that you've applied for. You'll want to anticipate and prepare questions that you can ask them. They will, without a doubt, ask you, do you have any questions for us? And there's only one right answer to that. You'll want to make sure you can address the tell me about yourself question. That's the 30-second elevator pitch. How do you answer that briefly? There's so much you could tell them. What do you tell them? We'll talk about it. You want to anticipate how you're going to dress for the occasion, whether it's in person or remote, unless it's, I suppose a chat bot is probably the one situation where you would not be seen at all. But even a video interview, you can see what somebody is wearing, or at least some of what somebody is wearing. And that's true with a recorded interview as well as a person-to-person remote interview. So you'll need to put some thought into that. And then if it's an in-person interview, and there are still in-person interviews, certain jobs simply cannot be done remotely. And if that's the kind of job you're applying for, you'll have to figure out, how am I going to get there? How long is it going to take? What's the best way of getting there? Public transportation, by car? If by car, can I park? All kinds of things you're going to want to know. And then if it's not in person, how do I manage the technology? What technology will I even be using? And do I have the equipment that I need in order to conduct the interview? So let's talk about some of the research that you're going to want to do. It's very important to know as much as you can about the employer. First of all, you may even discover just from doing the research that there's something about the employer that doesn't work for you. Who knows what that might be? It could be that they're not, that there are certain causes that you care about and they don't. Maybe not only do they not care, maybe they take an opposite point of view about certain things that are important to you. Well, for some people, those kinds of things are deal breakers. Not for everybody, but that's part of what your research will uncover for you. So what are they all about? What do they do? How long have they been around? Do they manufacture or sell a particular product? Do they offer a service? What are they all about? And then again, what's their mission? There might be an About Us section on their site. Go there and learn what's the history? Why did that company get formed in the first place? And what do they take pride in? What is it exactly that they offer? What are their services? And sometimes in their description of themselves, they let you know what they think is special about them. What sets them apart from other companies that do what they do? Who do they do business with? Who are their clients? Who are their competitors? All of those things help you to have a fuller understanding of them. And sometimes you can work some of that information into your answers, and they'll be really impressed that you did that degree of homework. Not everybody does. It's one of a number of ways that you can set yourself apart in a positive way. especially if you're going to be working on site, it helps to know where they are. Can you get there? Is it a tolerable commute? Is there public transportation if you need public transportation? Is there parking if you're going to be driving? And so on and so forth. Once you've filled in the gaps in your knowledge about the company, make sure you really understand what the position is that you've applied for to the best of your ability. Of course, you'll want to reread the job posting that you applied for. Maybe you can find descriptions of that job in people's LinkedIn profiles, possibly. If there are people in that position in that company and they've described their job on the website, you might, on LinkedIn's site, you might learn a little more about it. Certainly, it allows you to think about what don't you know about the position that you might ask about when you're there. And based on what you're reading about the job posting and the position, what skills do you need? What personal qualities or educational background are they looking for? Do you have that? Whatever you do have, make sure you can speak to the match between your background and this position. I see somebody's raising a hand. I don't have the ability to have you speak. If you can type a question in the chat, I'd be happy to answer. So some of the common interview questions, oops, wrong order there. Why should we hire you? Why should we hire you? We've got a lot of good candidates. And this is sometimes an uncomfortable question for people. Well, you don't necessarily know whether or not you're better than anyone else, but you do know what you bring to the table. So you can say, I have a certain amount of experience, maybe I have a certain amount of training, maybe it's personal qualities. I'm reliable, I'm really hardworking, I always go the extra mile. Previous managers have always, what's the word I'm looking for, complimented me because I come in early and I stay late because I really want to make sure I get the job done well. You might have stories like that to tell, and those stories can differentiate you from other candidates. Okay, somebody's letting me know for attendance purposes that she is here. And by the way, I will know that you're all here because Zoom takes care of that for me. As soon as you sign in, it recognizes that you're here. It's important to know why you want this job, and just, hey, I need a job is not the right answer. They need to know that there's something special about them or about this position, this opportunity that excites you. And it may be for some of you, I've been out of work for a long time, I just need to get a job. You don't say that, even if that's really the bottom line for you. You need to have some reason that this particular employer is attractive to you. So be sure you're able to answer that question in a way that is complimentary to them. Oh, and here they talk about, I really like the fact that your company is committed to dealing with food deprivation, people not having enough food, and they support the Walk for Hunger or something like that. And that's a cause you care about. You can tell them that. And they want people on board whose view of the world is similar to theirs. Be prepared for the what's your greatest strength and what's your greatest weakness questions. And be prepared for, if you're currently employed, probably most people in our session today are not. But if you are, why would you want to be leaving your current situation? And if that happens to be the case for anybody, just a straightforward answer, looking for a new opportunity, more challenge, opportunity for growth, things like that are fine. Can't stand my manager is not fine. So professionally honest within some boundaries. Pardon me while I sneeze. Oh, sorry, when I say that, the sneeze goes. Pardon me, sorry about that. Okay, and then sometimes there's a gap. And because this particular session tonight is part of the partnership that Susan was talking about earlier with the mayor's office and Project Opportunity, there may be some people in our group today who have a gap because of previous incarceration, or there are people who have a gap because they had a medical issue, or they were caring for a family member who might have had a medical issue, or caring for children, or just needed time off. Gaps occur for many, many different reasons, and employers don't always like the fact that there are gaps. They're not quite sure what that means, but you want to anticipate the question if there is a gap in your particular work history. And we're really talking only about a recent gap, I'd say in the last 5 years. Gaps that go back prior to that, if you've got a solid work history since then, won't be an issue. But if it's a recent gap, a straightforward one sentence answer about whatever was going on. The sandwich strategy can be useful, particularly if it's something like incarceration, where you don't really want to dwell on that particular circumstance. Same thing, I would say, even with a medical issue. I was sick for a couple of years. Well, that's going to raise some red flags for them as well. Is that going to happen again? So you don't need a lot of detail, but definitely talk about anything you might have done during the gap to improve your skills, to improve yourself, to just lessons learned just in the course of life and dealing with whatever your circumstance was. And then refocus on, here are the takeaways for me. I've learned that I need to do such and such going forward, and I've made that a priority. And keep it short and simple, and you're good to go. Greatest accomplishment. Some success story that you've had. Hopefully you've all had some success stories along the way. Give some thought to what stories really help showcase your best skills, your best personal qualities, the things that should be attractive to a client, to an employer rather. There may be more than one, and that's okay too, but think about those things ahead of time. It's really uncomfortable to be on the hot seat, so to speak, when you're asked a question that you haven't thought about, positive outcome, and all of a sudden you draw a blank, and that's really uncomfortable. So if you anticipate the likely questions, that will really offset a lot of the nervousness, I think. You might be asked the opposite of a great accomplishment. They might ask you about a challenging situation, a problem that happened at work that you had to deal with in one way or another. So you'll have to talk about that, and you'll have to do it in a way that doesn't make anybody else look bad. So you're sort of on a tightrope there, because you don't want to badmouth anybody. Well, there was this really unreasonable manager. That's not at all what you're ever going to want to say, or an unreasonable teammate or something like that. But just, difference of opinion. Person number one wanted this, person number two wanted that. I wanted something else. Here's how we solved the problem. Just keep it neutral. So even if you think people were totally unreasonable and behaved badly in the situation, you don't bring that part of the story in. They may very well ask you where you see yourself in 5 years. Common question. And they can ask it, well, they do ask it, regardless of where you are in your career or where you are in your age. So don't be surprised if you get that question. I'm not always sure what the purpose is behind the question, but if you have some sort of a vision of where you hope to see yourself, that's fine. Just make it a realistic vision and not, 5 years, I'm going to be president of the United States. Probably not going to happen. So keep it, something that is going to make sense to people. And then anticipate the question they almost always ask, do you have any questions for me? the answer to which is always a 3-letter word that you see on the screen, YES, absolutely. And we'll say a little more. They may also ask questions if any of you in our group today are looking to change career. And that might be the case for any number of you for, again, many possible reasons, but they want to know what that's all about. Why are you looking to leave what you used to do and enter a new field? And what have you done to kind of put some skin in the game, if I can use that expression? It's all well and good to say, well, I've been a career coach for all these years, but I think now I'd like to be a photographer in your photography studio. Wait, what? How does that make sense? Why does that follow? And do I know what's really involved? I just made something up, obviously. I'm not looking to be a photographer. But if in fact I'm looking to make a change, there needs to be some thought behind that, not just kind of a whim. Well, I've always liked photography. Yeah, but what do you know about the day-to-day work of being a professional photographer? Well, not much, but it's sure fun taking pictures. You really have to know what's involved, talk to people doing that work. That makes you a much more credible candidate. Also, if you have the opportunity to volunteer or take part-time or short-term gigs doing that work to try it out, that's helpful. Or training that you might have done to prepare you shows you're serious. This isn't just a whim. You've really, as I said, sort of made an investment in this new direction. So let's focus for a few minutes as you're preparing for an interview on the tell me about yourself question. Or tell me about your work history. That one's a little easier because at least the work history narrows the focus. When they say tell me about yourself, that's so open-ended. People get confused by that and they go back to, well, I was born in Kansas City, and nobody wants that kind of history. They do really want to know more about your career, possibly your education. Who are you professionally and what do you bring to the table is the essence of what's going to go into the answer to that question. And we refer to that answer as an elevator pitch. The phrase comes from the idea that an elevator ride isn't very long. If you happen by chance, good fortune, to find yourself on an elevator with the manager of the department of the company that you would like to work for, there you were alone with this person, and you had the opportunity to introduce yourself and let them know, I'm really interested in a job in your company. What would you say? That's what we want you to work into your answer to this elevator pitch. So it should take about 30 seconds, because that's probably the length of the elevator ride, this imaginary elevator ride. You won't, in all likelihood, ever deliver this answer on an elevator. Nevertheless, 30 seconds is about people's attention span. And it summarizes who you are professionally and what you bring to the employer. You can talk about goals that you have. You can talk about experience that you've had in the field, training or education that qualifies you for this work. Those are some of the components that can go into it. And it's something you'll want to spend some time thinking about and then practicing. It's a really useful piece of information to be able to share in many different contexts. You'll find it useful in interviews because this tell me about yourself question is such a common question, but it's also a handy answer in networking conversations, which occur every place. Not just in formal networking meetings, although that's certainly one place, but even we're hopefully turning the corner on good, leaving bad weather behind and having good weather approach us. Maybe we'll be at a family barbecue with neighbors and friends of the host, and you'll be talking to people you don't know, and they're going to be saying, so what do you do? Who are you? Tell me about yourself. Perfect opportunity to answer that question and deliver your elevator pitch. The elevator pitch may vary a little bit depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to somebody in your field, you can use some language and terminology that they're going to be familiar with because they work in that field. If you're talking to a random stranger, they might not be familiar with the buzzwords in your particular occupation. So you might want to make sure you can explain to somebody. I sometimes think in terms of, imagine yourself explaining at a high school career fair to high school students, what is it you do in your role as a career coach, as a photographer, as a whatever it might be. The example that comes to mind, because I watched this happen in live time in an in-person workshop a few years back prior to the pandemic, we were doing introductions in a workshop, and I always ask people to share their name, what sort of work they're looking for, and that's it basically. Then we go around the room. This one person introduced himself. My name is, and I'm looking for a job as a Scrum Master. And I stopped before we kept going around the room, and I said, I have to ask, please raise your hand if you know what a Scrum Master is. And I think 3 people out of about 15 or 20 raised their hands. And I said to him, it's important to understand people in your world, your professional world, know exactly what that means. The average person does not. So think about whether that job title means anything to a typical person on the street, because it may not. So we have some slides that illustrate in a little more detail what an elevator pitch might be like. I'm a customer service rep. I have experience and interest in, and you can see each of the opening phrases might be a way to sort of structure your elevator pitch. You don't have to do it this way, but this could be one way to organize your pitch. I'm a customer service rep. I have expertise in, or I have an interest in, maybe I've been in a different field, but now I'm hoping to get into entertainment and AV equipment. I've worked at a call center in the past. I really enjoy helping people and solving problems. I'm known for good communication. I'm looking for opportunities in sales. So, that's one way to organize it. I think if it were in a job interview, I don't know that I would add, I'm looking for opportunities in sales. If you've applied for a sales job and they're interviewing you for a sales job, it seems to me that's sort of apparent that that's why you're there. But you certainly can bring in, I have a lot of experience in this role. I've been in this industry, and here's what I love about it, or here's what I'm especially good at, and here's how I can help you or help your customers, as the case may be. So this is fleshed out a little bit more. I've been a customer service rep at a call center where I learned the importance of listening and providing options to customers. While in that role, I enjoyed the challenge of solving customer problems, but would enjoy more opportunity to use my sales skills. So this person's beginning to explain, I've been in one role and I'm looking to make a change. And I'd like to use my knowledge of electronics to help customers identify the right products for their home entertainment needs. So this is a short and sweet explanation of why I'm going from customer service to sales, but still bringing with me my good listening skills, my problem solving skills, and my knowledge of electronics, all of which will be relevant, even though the role is slightly different. And then, of course, they are going to ask almost certainly, do you have any questions for me? So I'm going to take a minute and give you all an opportunity to share with the group in the chat some of the questions you like to ask employers. In one word, that's interesting challenge. So in one word, describe your culture here. Very interesting. Another one. What do you value most in an employee? Absolutely. if they give you some clues about what's important to them, that gives you a perfect opportunity to let them know if you have whatever that quality is and give them an example of that. What challenges do you see moving after the second callback? Adam, I'm not sure, the transcription software may not have gotten that quite right. I'm wondering if you can say that again. Moving forward after the second in the early phase of the job. Okay, so absolutely knowing what challenges are going to be ahead, what are the most important goals that you're going to have to achieve. They may have some very well-defined expectations for you and some very specific problems that they're looking to have solved by whoever they hire. Important to know all of those things. And part of what you'll evaluate is, do you think those expectations are realistic? Do you think you can achieve that for them? Because not all jobs are going to be a right fit. All right, any other thoughts? All right, let's look at that a little bit more. So they want to know you're interested. They want to know that you fit, that you have what they're looking for, and you're taking this process seriously. So some of the questions that we're recommending, in addition to the very good ones that you all suggested, what's most satisfying or most challenging about this job? Now, the person you're interviewing with may not have held that job directly themselves, but maybe they have. And either way, they may have some feedback. What have people who have been in this role before said they like about it? What if they dislike about it? And understand that one person's "this was really satisfying" could be your "that would really make me miserable." And that's okay. So that person's opinion gives you something to bounce off of. I find it really satisfying that every day every day I have different problems to solve. No 2 days are alike. And you might be thinking, oh my goodness, I need predictability. I want a certain amount of routine. I want to know what I'm doing every day. I don't want everything to be different. So that's useful information, even though your opinion about it would be different, but you learn that that's a quality of this particular opportunity. What are the top priorities for this position? What's the most important thing you need to get done in the first few months or first few weeks, as the case may be? What qualities are you looking for in a successful candidate? Another way of asking that is also to ask if there was somebody in that role before, and if so, you might, when they answer that question, you might get a sense of, oh yes, we had this most wonderful person, and we're delighted that he got a better opportunity. Okay, good. But so now they like the person. Well, what made that person successful? Or you might say, yep, there was somebody here. We're looking forward to having somebody come on board who's going to be a little stronger in such and such a skill. Oh, okay. You may get a little bit of insight just based on their feedback about the prior person in that role. And then, what do you like best about working here? Again, that's similar to the satisfying, challenging question. That person's like or dislike might be different from your own, but as that person evaluates something, you learn about a quality of the job or of the organization. Because remember, you're still trying to figure out if this is a good fit for you. You don't know that yet. we're going to talk about how to dress and how not to dress for an interview. So as you can see from the X, this is a perfect example of what not to wear. A little bit over the top, a little too formal. Now, if you're going to the Oscars, maybe, but not for a job interview. Here's another not for a job interview. It's the other end, too casual. Generally speaking, skin from the neck up, arms is fine. You don't want to see torso. You don't want to see cleavage. You don't want to see too much. And then again, a little bit too much. This is tuxedo, not required for a job interview. And the other side of the scale, a little too casual. Probably somewhere in between, a couple of options and a few more options. Business casual is generally speaking going to be okay a lot of the time now. If it's a senior level or professional job, you might want to kind of get a sense of whether or not a suit and tie is required, but especially these days where so many people are dressing very casually, things are being done remotely, may not be necessary to be quite as formal as we used to be. But I would say if it's an in-person interview, if you have an opportunity to visit the location before the day of the interview, and if you have an opportunity to see people coming in and out of the organization, get a sense of what the style of dress is, that might give you some guidelines. So dress professionally, one level up from whatever the expected outfit would be on the job. And again, better to go a little bit on the overdressed side rather than underdressed. Business casual is usually fine. For if there's anybody in need of appropriate clothing, there are some options. Oh my goodness. You can check with us. There's an organization called Dress for Success that has made clothing available for women. I don't know if they do men at this point or not. And there are some other organizations as well that can help provide appropriate clothing. Just make sure everything is looking clean and unwrinkled and things like that. And again, questions for them help you to decide if this is a good fit for you. Make sure you come away from the interview absolutely clear on what you'll be expected to do on this job and that you're okay with that. You should know who you're going to be reporting to. You may or may not meet that person in a first round interview. Somewhere along the way, you would hope to meet them. And get a sense of the culture of the work environment. One of you mentioned that as a question. Absolutely. You want to know, is this a very relaxed atmosphere where you can come in a little bit late, you can leave a little bit early, nobody's punching in, you get to take a break whenever you want to, or is it a more regimented organization, or the job itself may require that you absolutely be on time. The store has to open by 9 o'clock, so you must be there. Things like that. There's no latitude when it comes to opening the business or things of that sort. Tailored for Success has professional clothing for women and men. Thank you. I had not heard of that. So I wonder if that's an expansion of Dress for Success, or if that's just a sort of a spin-off, a variation. Thank you for sharing that, Elizabeth. I'm going to make a note of that myself. Very good to know. Nerves, how to manage the nerves. As I said, for me, one thing is to remind myself, I don't know if I want this job. I also remind myself, and I think this can be helpful for people, is this is not like a test in school where there are definite right answers or wrong answers. Yes, you do want to have questions for them, but which questions? They're not, they don't have a master list that they're checking off. Okay, she asked me that question. It's more conversational. So if you're in the mindset of, uh-oh, I'm on the spot here, see if you can reframe that. Say, I'm not on the spot. They're on the spot. They have to prove themselves to me. I'm going to find out if this is a place I want to work, if this is a job that I want, even if the place is a place I think I'd like to work at. This might not be the right, might try that again, might not be the right job for me. So that can help. All of the preparation that we've talked about absolutely helps to reduce anxiety. Practice, prepare answers to the most common questions. Make sure you've gotten a good night's sleep, you've had some food, so you're not feeling a little bit uncomfortable from hunger. And give yourself enough time so that you're not scrambling at the last minute, which only makes us all a little bit more anxious. So let yourself relax a little bit. And also give yourself, if it's an in-person interview, give yourself some leeway to get there early so you're not feeling frantic. And you can see that on this slide. If it is in person, do a practice run if at all possible, if you have the time to do that. Make sure you know exactly where they're located, how you're going to get there. If you're going to have to go by car, where does the car go when you're in the interview? And things of that sort. I tend to be on the early side in most things that I do. With an interview, you don't really actually want to show up at the, at the door of the interviewer more than 15 minutes ahead of time. But I think it's fine to be in the neighborhood 30 minutes ahead of time. The main thing is you don't want to be flying in the door at the last minute. Just got there, plopping yourself down in the seat, catching your breath, and then feeling frazzled because you almost didn't get there in time. So now you're there and the interview begins, and they make a judgment based on first impressions. So keep in mind that from the moment you are not only physically on the site, if it is an on-site interview, but even within view of the interviewer, you are being evaluated. I've heard of situations where, picture a company that has its own building. It's not in an office building like our office is, but it's its own plant on its own property, and there's a parking lot and everything. So you drive into the parking lot, you sit in your car for 20 minutes because you're early. That's great, but they're watching you smoke your cigarettes and comb your hair and all this. They can see you through the windows. So be aware of where you are in relation to the people who might be making judgments. When you do enter the building, be aware that anybody you cross paths with might possibly weigh in on your candidacy. Were you friendly to the receptionist? Did you smile to at the security guard or make small talk as you walked through, past the security check? Whatever people you might have crossed paths with, you simply don't know who they are. You might, I've known of situations where people were walking toward the office that they were going to be interviewed in. Somebody was walking in the opposite direction. That person ended up being the person who interviewed them. They were on their way to the restroom, and they, came back, and lo and behold. So say hi to people, be friendly, because you just don't know. Your body language is going to carry a lot of weight. So be aware of whether you tend to slump, whether you tend to have nervous tics, twirl your hair or click a pen or tap your foot, or all of those things that we're inclined to do when we get nervous. And body language matters even in a virtual interview. So I've spent a lot of time talking about in-person interviews. For virtual interviews, You don't need to be 15 minutes ahead of time. They're not going to let you in the room, so 5 minutes ahead is fine. Again, you just don't want to be plopping into the chair at the very last minute. But to some extent, body language is visible even in a virtual situation. If I had no PowerPoint, but just the screen with me there, you would see more of my torso and you would see my face and my arm gestures and stuff. So be aware of what is visible to the other people and make sure you're adjusting your body language appropriately. You want to lean forward, both in person and in a webinar, I don't mean a webinar, in a remote interview, there we go. Because leaning forward says you're moving toward the person, you're engaged with them. And that is what we do as humans when we're interested. When we're not interested, we lean back, we're sort of bored, we're indifferent. That's the impression that gives. So you want to be leaning toward whoever you're talking to, and be aware of the expression on your face. Keep in mind that when we do get nervous, our face can get a little more tense looking and anxious. Anxious isn't the look you want to have, so concentrate on having a friendly expression. Want to be calm and confident if possible. I don't know if people are doing handshakes right now. I haven't been on an in-person interview in quite a few years, so I'm not even sure handshakes are called for these days. I would take the lead of the person I'm interviewing with, and I might choose not to shake hands. I might actually say, I hope you'll forgive me, but given the pandemic, I'd prefer not to shake hands. I'm thinking people would not be offended by that. They are back. Okay, cool. Good to know. And eye contact. Eye contact is what also, along with a smile, tells people I'm interested, I'm paying attention to what you're saying. So be aware of the eye contact piece. And because we do get nervous and some of us do have fidgety habits, when we get nervous, be aware of what those habits are for you and try to manage them if you can. Handshakes are definitely back. Bring sanitizer if you're concerned. Okay, cool. I mean, it's useful to know that. One of the things that we teach people for interviewing is a format or a framework, if you will, for answering questions so that the people who tend to talk too much get reined in and the people who don't quite say enough are encouraged to tell a little more detail. And we call this framework the STAR strategy. You'll find it in almost anybody that talks about interviewing these days talks about this. STAR stands for situation, task, action, and results. And it's a really handy way to tell your stories when somebody asks you some of the interview questions. A lot of the questions come in the form of, tell me about a time. Tell me about a situation when such and such happened. And you're expected to tell some of the stories from your work history. So how do you do that without talking for 5 minutes or only 5 seconds? STAR causes you to focus. 1 or 2 sentences answering each of these things. What was the situation? Let's say they say, tell me about a time you were working on a team and the team didn't all get along and agree on how to do whatever the task was. Okay, hopefully you've thought about what some of the tell me about a time questions might be. There are tons of lists of questions like that. But you'll want to think about what are some of the more challenging situations you've dealt with? What are some of the more successful situations you've dealt with so that you can create these STAR stories? And you'll say, well, I was on a team that was comprised of somebody from accounting, somebody from marketing, and somebody from human resources. I'm totally making this up. We had to come up with a plan to do such and such. That was the situation. 2 sentences. Task. My role was, and you describe what you were expected to do. Action. The team didn't agree on the best course of action, so I suggested, and you tell whatever that was. And the outcome was we all came to agree that we would move forward using this particular direction. There's your story. It's short and sweet. You don't tend to say too much. You don't tend to say too little. You've explained your role in this process. Gee, everybody wasn't getting along. A lot of these questions, a lot of the STAR or the tell me about a time questions are about negative things. So be prepared for that. And we all have situations that didn't go well, where there were problems, and maybe the problems didn't get resolved in a satisfactory way. But again, you can either come up with other examples that do have a good outcome, or find the positive angle on, what I learned from that situation was, okay, now you know. Preparing for these, go back to the job posting. You've looked at that job posting, you have a sense of what skills are required for that job. See if you can come up with some work examples, real life examples of you using those very skills. So you can then work those stories into the tell me about a time situations. A lot of the time, the tell me about a time stories can fit a number of different situations. Yeah, maybe the team didn't get along, so that's one thing that story could illustrate, but maybe that story also illustrates you stepping into a leadership role. It wasn't your job to be the leader, but you saw that there was disagreement in the group. You stepped forward and did whatever. So that same story can make several different points. So think about your skills, think about some of your best stuff, the most satisfying stories, and even some of the more challenging things that maybe started out looking like they weren't going to go very well, but they ended up working out okay. Practice, make sure they're not overly long. 2 or 3 sentences usually is going to be close to the right length for each of the letters in the STAR stories, and then get comfortable telling the story. You don't need to have it memorized. The main thing is this is a conversation. So if somebody says, tell me about, one of your best successes, boy, have I got a story for you. When I think about my own career, I have 2 particular stories that always come to mind right away. Those will always be my go-to stories. I love talking about those particular situations, the people that I worked with, and what was going on and what the outcome was. They were really nice stories, and I think they illustrate some useful things. Everybody has those stories. Things not to do during the interview. This is really about what you did do. You certainly can talk about lessons learned. I think that's okay. But they do want to know, well, what happened? They don't want to know about how terrible your last manager was, or even how terrible your coworkers were, even if they were. And sometimes they are. I'm not denying that, but this is not the place to tell those stories. This is the place to put the positive spin on what was going on. Be specific enough so they really can picture you doing what you did. They want to envision you in their job, in their company. And this is really about your role, not what the team did. It's a little bit about the team if it's part of a team, but what was your part of the team? How did you influence things? How did you step out of the team and make an individual contribution? Ideally, if they ask you a tell me about a time question, it would be, they want to know that there is an example. I have to imagine sometimes there just isn't, in which case there's not much you can do. You probably, I think you're sort of stuck with I don't think that's happened. And if you find yourself in a situation where you simply can't think of something, you didn't anticipate a particular question or topic, and later on, the perfect answer comes to you. I have a solution for that situation. I'll tell you about it later on. Again, keep any negative commentary out of the conversation. Snide comments about anybody, customers, managers, coworkers, the previous company just doesn't belong there. And it's important to communicate that you're a good team player. That's a big part of what they're looking for when they're interviewing you. You've probably heard the expression, do you play well with the other kids in the sandbox? That's part of what they're looking to see. Are you going to be a good employee to have around, or are you going to be that thorn in our side, that person that irritates everybody? Even though you might be wonderfully skilled, you might do the task very well, but boy, are you a pain, and nobody likes having you around. You don't want to communicate that you have those qualities. Of course, assuming nobody here has those qualities, but in reality, some people do. And then again, you want your stories to show that you do give some forethought to the work that you do. You're not just flying by the seat of your pants. Although if you have a story that demonstrates your ability to think quickly and act when an unexpected situation occurs, that's okay too. That's a useful story. But generally speaking, you don't want to say, well, I was a teacher and I never did lesson plans. They don't want to hear that. They expect you to do lesson plans. And as you're wrapping up the interview, be sure you let them know if you're interested. They have no way of knowing unless you tell them. And they're more interested in hiring somebody who does want the job than somebody who seems half-hearted or not interested. So it's perfectly okay to say, as they're wrapping up and they're saying, thanks for coming in today, for you to say, I'm so glad we had an opportunity to speak. I'm even more excited about this opportunity than I was when I first applied, or something like that, if it's genuine. Perfectly okay and recommended to ask, what happens next? Where are you in the process? And, when do you expect to make a decision? You don't know if you're the first person they're planning to see, the last person they're going to see. If you're the first person, you may have a long wait before you hear from them again. And that's really frustrating, to say the least, exasperating even. So ask, what's your process? Where are you? And then let's say they say, we expect to wrap things up by a week from Friday. Great. And if I don't hear from you the following week, may I give you a call? Or again, whatever time frame makes sense to you. They may ask you for references. It's always a good idea to know who you're going to give as references and be sure that you've cleared that with people ahead of time. And then just to reiterate, there was supposed to be another slide. Let me go back. Hang on a minute. I apologize. I wonder if, before I recap, let me introduce the slide that seems to be missing, which is the last step in the process is a thank you note. Within 24 hours, whether the interview was in person or remote, send a thank you to each person you might have interviewed with if it was more than one. Separate, unique thank you notes to each person. You can email them, that's perfectly okay, but it's important. And my what to do if you don't think of an answer on the spot, but you think of it later, strategy is that's something you can do with the thank you note, along with thanks so much for the opportunity to talk with you today. I really enjoyed meeting the members of the team. I'm very excited about this opportunity. Look forward to the next steps in the process. You could say, as I was thinking about our conversation, I realized that, such and such was, you asked a question about such and such, and I actually, though I didn't think of it on the spot, I realized, I did have an experience that is similar to what you were asking about. I'm phrasing it very awkwardly right now, but you basically can insert an answer and recover from a place where you think you might have messed up a little bit. The opposite, if you think you scored points, and sometimes you can tell, you answer a question and you look at the interviewer and they're just nodding enthusiastically and they're smiling and they seem to be right on board with you. When that happens, make a mental note. I really like that answer. And then in your thank you, once you've done the basic niceties, it was nice to meet you all, you can say, as we discussed, and then repeat the point that you made. My experience doing such and such can really benefit your organization, as it did my previous employer, or something like that. And they're just, oh yeah, that's right, you're the person that had that great story. Use the thank you letter strategically. All right, so the recap. It's a conversation. It's all it is. It's not an exam. It's not an interrogation. It's a conversation. You want to find out if they're a good fit. They want to find out if you're a good fit. Plan for the possibility of many different kinds of interviews along the way, and know the specific things that will help you in each of those situations. We do have I have two commas there. We have a webinar on video interviewing for those of you who are not familiar with that process. And be friendly to everybody. Be sure your body language is positive and open and engaged. And your voice as well as your body. You be sure that you're speaking in your natural voice. I've heard people in practice interviews become very wooden and they speak as if they're a robot and they have no inflection in their voice. And I don't know why they do that, because that's not how we talk in real life. Talk the way you talk in real life. Be enthusiastic about the things that excite you. You can express emotion, not extreme emotion, of course, but you are human and you want to engage with them as a human being. So the inflection, your voice quality, even the volume at which you speak. Sometimes people get very timid and they speak very quietly. You don't need to talk normally. Talk as if you're in the room with somebody, even if you're doing it remotely. Make sure you've done your homework, do your research, have your star answers, and have your elevator pitch, your tell me about yourself answer. Have at least 5 questions. You don't necessarily have to ask 5, but sometimes when they tell you a little bit about the position, they provide information that answers one of your questions. One of your questions might have been, was there somebody in this role beforehand? And they might start out by saying, well, we're really sorry to see this person go. Oh, I guess there was somebody in the role beforehand. So cross that question off. You want to have enough so that you do actually have questions for them when they ask. And then find out what happens next in this process. Be sure you have their contact information. And if you forget to ask for it, usually there's some person who set up the interview, might have been the actual person, but it's often an admin person. You can go back to that person, or maybe there was an email that set things up and you've got contact information there. And then don't forget the thank you notes. So that is our session. These are some of the additional webinars that we offer at MassHire Downtown Boston that relate to what we were talking about today. We do have career coaching, actually virtual and in person now. So if you want to do a practice interview, we can help with that. If you want to know more about those behavioral questions, the tell me about a time kinds of questions, the Interview 2.0 webinar focuses exclusively on those. You want more work on your elevator pitch? We have a webinar on that. And if video or virtual interviews are a new concept for you, we have a webinar on that as well. So those are our offerings. Let me pause and see if there are any questions from the group tonight, anything that I did not cover. Why would a hiring manager respond to my thank you, then never respond to my email, voicemail, oh my goodness. see online that the hiring manager is still listed for her old position as well as her new position. Very frustrating. Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that, just because we're dealing with humans, and humans sometimes get it right and sometimes they get it wrong, and they just don't behave the way we wish they would. They get busy, they get bored, they've moved on. Sometimes they don't answer because the answer is bad news and they don't want to have to be the one to tell you. So they let their silence tell you instead, which is rude and disrespectful and unfortunate. But that's also a message. If somebody's going to behave that way, I'm thinking maybe I didn't want to work for them in the first place. That's my takeaway. I'm also disappointed because I probably wanted the job, but that's my best theory about what's going on in those situations. Yeah, that's really annoying, Susan. I can sympathize with that. Other questions? I'll wait a minute because sometimes people type a little bit slowly. I am guessing no questions. And so I will thank you all for participating. You shared some information that was helpful to me, so I appreciate your input and your comments and questions. And I will end our session for tonight and send the materials to you later on. I hope to see you at future sessions as well. Thanks, everybody. Take care.